The cafe lights flickered against the Cairo midnight, throwing uneven shadows on cracked tiles and smoke-stained walls. A man in a linen suit sat in the corner, half hidden by drifting clouds of shisha smoke. His hand trembled slightly as he stirred the tea, not from fear, but from awareness. He wasn't supposed to be here, not tonight. Not with that briefcase beneath his chair. A phone rang once. He didn't answer. Not yet. He knew that single ring meant everything had changed. Again. It was the signal that the desert itself was beginning to move, whispering of betrayals, of missions too delicate to exist on paper. He stared at the window, where the reflection of the Nile shimmered like liquid steel. Somewhere beyond that river, an invisible war was unfolding. And he had just been pulled into it. If you love spy wars like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next classified file. And tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? I love knowing how far these stories travel through the shadows. He rose from his seat, leaving behind the unfinished tea and the faint echo of a radio playing an old Arabic song. The briefcase was light, yet it carried the weight of an entire nation's secrets. He stepped outside into the narrow alley, where the scent of diesel mixed with the cool breath of the desert wind. Every step felt heavier than the last. The year was 1954. Egypt stood at a crossroads, proud, wounded, reborn. The monarchy had fallen, and under Nasser's rising power, the streets pulsed with a new kind of energy. Students marched for independence, soldiers whispered of loyalty, and officers in smoky rooms dreamed of unity that stretched from the Nile to Damascus. Yet beneath the speeches and banners, another Egypt existed. One of shadows, of coded messages, of silent men who moved unseen through the heat. Across the borders, in quiet rooms lit by green lamps, another intelligence service watched closely. They called themselves the Guardians of Survival. To them, Egypt was not a neighbor. It was a threat wrapped in history. Files were opened, operatives were dispatched, and Cairo became a chessboard where every pawn was a person, every night a potential betrayal. In the cafes, secrets flowed as freely as coffee. The newly formed Egyptian intelligence service had begun tracing whispers. Strange meetings between foreign businessmen, coded telegrams sent through embassies, mysterious letters that smelled faintly of foreign ink. And then, a message intercepted by accident, a shipment of communication equipment bound for a warehouse in Alexandria. Unsigned, unregistered, and unexplainable. That was how it began. A small, ordinary mistake that exposed something extraordinary. The man in the linen suit, his name was not important, not yet, had stumbled into the heart of it. His role had been simple: track shipments for a shipping company near the Suez Canal. But the documents that crossed his desk told a different story. Equipment that didn't match orders. Cargo addressed to empty buildings. Receipts stamped by hands that didn't exist. And in every detail, one symbol kept returning. Small, sharp, almost invisible. He didn't understand what it meant, but he knew who might. So he did what every cautious man does when the truth feels dangerous. He reported it quietly, hoping it would disappear. It didn't. By the time his report reached the wrong ears, it was too late. He was summoned that night, told to bring the briefcase and nothing else. Inside it were copies of manifests, letters, and one photograph. A photograph that should not have existed, and that would soon shake Cairo's quiet confidence. He hailed a taxi under the dim glow of a street lamp. The driver didn't speak. Neither did he. The city slipped past in silence. Vendors closing stalls, soldiers on corners, muezzin calls fading into the night. He stared at his own reflection in the window, wondering how much longer he would remain anonymous. When he reached the hotel, He moved quickly up the stairs, briefcase still tight in his grip. The hallway was empty. He entered his room, bolted the door, and opened the case. Inside were sheets of yellowed paper. Nothing special at first glance, just trade logs, shipping codes, signatures. But then his eyes fell on a photograph folded between them. It showed the interior of a small shop in Cairo, its shelves lined with books. In the background, a man's face was half visible in the mirror. Foreign, smiling slightly. On the edge of the frame, the same symbol appeared again, scratched into the wooden shelf. He stared at it for a long time. Something about that symbol burned into him. A mark of connection that shouldn't exist. A thread between Cairo and somewhere far beyond. He didn't yet understand it, but deep down, he knew. This was the proof someone would kill for. A knock came at the door. 3 times. Soft. Deliberate. He froze. The voice outside said his name once, quietly. He stayed silent. Another knock. Then footsteps fading down the hall. He didn't sleep that night. The desert outside was silent, as if holding its breath. In the early hours before dawn, he stepped onto the balcony. The sky was beginning to pale, and Cairo lay beneath him. Ancient, restless, unknowingly caught between the world's newest intelligence war. The call for prayer drifted through the air, haunting and beautiful. He thought about the photograph, about the face in the mirror, about the symbol that linked everything. He didn't know it yet, but this small discovery would ignite one of the most secret conflicts the Middle East had ever seen. A war fought not with armies, but with whispers. And in that quiet, as the first light touched the desert sands, the man in the linen suit finally understood the rule every spy learns too late. The truth is never buried. It only hides beneath the dust, waiting for someone foolish enough to look. The morning sun rose heavy over Cairo, casting gold across the minarets and rooftops. The man in the linen suit hadn't slept. He stood by the balcony, eyes fixed on the city that was beginning to awaken. The same streets that, hours from now, would burn with whispers of betrayal. He folded the photograph once more and slid it back into the briefcase. The knock at his door had not returned, but he could still feel its echo. Somewhere in this vast city, someone knew he had seen too much. By late morning, the cafes were alive again, typewriters clacking, tea boiling, voices trading gossip of ministers and scandals. But beneath that ordinary rhythm, something unseen was unraveling. A network of young Egyptians, educated, fluent in multiple languages, lived ordinary lives under extraordinary orders. They were tailors, clerks, shopkeepers, and secretly part of an operation that did not officially exist. They carried no badges, no uniforms, and no names that could be traced. Their mission was simple on paper: to plant chaos. Small, controlled fires in the dark, the kind of fires that make governments nervous and foreign powers suspicious. The kind of fires that change policy without declaring war. In smoky rooms lit by single bulbs, instructions were whispered in code. Packages passed through hands under the cover of night. Letters carried invisible ink and promises. Explosives small enough to hide inside a book were prepared with trembling fingers. No one asked questions. No one could. To ask meant knowing too much. And in this war of shadows, knowing was the most dangerous crime of all. The operation's logic was cold. A few fires in foreign institutions, a few explosions blamed on Egypt's internal enemies. Enough to make the world doubt Cairo's stability. Enough to weaken Nasser's image, to suggest that the new Egypt was already fracturing. But Cairo was not a city that slept through its own sabotage. The first explosion caught the night watchman by surprise. The second one didn't. By the third, the intelligence service was already watching the pattern form. The man in the linen suit, now drawn deeper than he ever intended, had become the thread linking it all. His shipping reports, his intercepted memos, the photograph with the symbol, all pointed towards something bigger, something spreading quietly beneath the surface. His superiors told him to stay silent, but silence was no longer an option. That evening, as the city darkened, he met an officer from the General Intelligence Directorate in a parked car by the Nile embankment. The officer's face was hidden in shadow. His voice was low and calm. "Do you know what you've walked into?" "No," the man replied. "Then listen carefully. You've uncovered a piece of a larger machine, one that was never meant to operate here. There are others, teachers, students, a network. Someone has promised them a cause, but the cause is not Egypt's." The man said nothing. He only handed over the photograph. The officer studied it under the glow of the dashboard light. His jaw tightened. "Burn your copies," he whispered. "They'll come for you next." By the end of that week, Cairo erupted in chaos. Police surrounded bookstores, schools, and quiet streets that had never known suspicion. Dozens of arrests followed. Names were printed in the newspapers. Rumors filled the air. Who were these people, and who commanded them? The trial that followed shocked the Arab world. In packed courtrooms, under the glare of lights and cameras, the accused stood silent, young faces, trembling hands, some refusing to speak even as evidence piled before them. The nation watched in disbelief as the story unfolded. Secret orders, sabotage, foreign handlers hidden behind diplomatic immunity. The newspapers called it a network of shadows. But within intelligence circles, it was given another name: the Lavon Affair. For Egypt, the revelation was a wound. For the operatives who planned it, it was a disaster. For the world, it was proof that espionage had no moral lines. As the sentences were handed down, Cairo's streets filled with murmurs, not of revenge, but of awakening. A lesson had been learned beneath the sand. Even in the age of spies, truth can bleed through the cracks. The man in the linen suit vanished soon after the trials began. Some said he was taken into protective custody. Others believed he disappeared across the Sinai, never to return. What remained were fragments: his reports, the photograph, and a single coded note found in his room. "The desert speaks in silence. Listen long enough, and it will tell you who buried the fire." The affair changed Egypt's understanding of intelligence forever. Its agencies hardened, its eyes sharpened. Trust became a weapon, secrecy a shield. In the years that followed, Cairo's skyline grew taller, but its alleys darker. The war beneath the sands had entered a new phase, one where no one trusted a handshake, and even the walls had ears. And somewhere, deep beneath the noise of the city, another file was being opened. A file marked confidential, urgent, dangerous. The hunt had begun again. Not for bombs this time, but for minds. The desert has a way of keeping secrets, but it never forgets. Years had passed since the fires of Cairo, and Egypt had learned that the greatest wars are often fought in silence. The nation turned its eyes from smoke and scandal to something grander: the future. Factories rose near the Nile. Workshops lit up the nights with sparks and promise. Nasser's speeches thundered with dreams of progress, pride, and power. Egypt would no longer be a spectator in the world's balance. It would shape it. And in that vision was a single word that changed everything: missiles. In the quiet offices of the Ministry of Industry, engineers drew blueprints that looked like fragments of the sky. But to turn those drawings into steel and fire, Egypt needed minds, experts who had once built weapons for empires now fallen. And so, quietly, they were invited. Scientists from Europe, men with heavy accents and heavier histories, stepping off planes with briefcases full of calculations. They were told they were building weather rockets. They knew better. To Cairo, They were instruments of independence. To others, they were a threat that could not be allowed to breathe. Far away, in rooms filled with cigarette smoke and radio static, Mossad listened. It wasn't "hear the sound of Egypt," speeches that worried them. It was the sound of engines being tested in the desert. Each launch meant a step closer to an Arab nation mastering the skies. Each scientist recruited was a new variable they couldn't control. And so began one of the strangest chapters in the secret history of the Middle East. A war fought through letters, packages, and fear. The first warning arrived in a small apartment in Zurich. A German engineer opened an envelope with his morning coffee and froze. Inside was a single photograph of his daughter walking to school and a note that read, "She is safer when you stop." 2 days later, another letter appeared on the desk of a Cairo project manager. "Tell your guests to leave, or we will visit them ourselves." Soon the letters turned into explosions. A parcel meant for an engineer detonated in his office, leaving nothing but silence and smoke. Another man was snatched from the street, never to be seen again. The campaign had no name, no official admission. But within the Egyptian intelligence files, it was remembered simply as the Hunt. Cairo's General Intelligence Directorate moved quickly. Foreign specialists were relocated under protection, travel monitored, correspondence screened. Yet paranoia spread like dust in the wind. Every phone call seemed tapped. Every knock at the door could mean death. In a secure room near Abasia, officers mapped connections. Photographs pinned by thin threads, faces marked in red. The man who had once held the mysterious briefcase, the one who vanished after the Lavon Affair, was whispered to be working somewhere in that building now, hidden under another name. His knowledge of networks, symbols, and patterns made him invaluable. At night, he studied intercepted mail, tracing the style of handwriting, the tilt of letters, the rhythm of threat. "Whoever writes these," he said softly, "writes with conviction. Not vengeance, purpose." The room fell silent. Everyone understood. These weren't random killings. This was strategy. Fear used as a scalpel. Officially, the government stayed quiet, unwilling to show weakness. Unofficially, the security services worked day and night, intercepting coded messages and tracking suspicious foreigners who drifted through the city, pretending to sell medical equipment or film stock. Every shadow felt occupied, every silence felt watched. And yet, amid the fear, Egypt's missile project continued. Rockets launched from the desert, streaking into the night sky like flares of defiance. Each successful test was a message, not to the world, but to itself, that the dream of power was alive. But for the man in the linen suit, power had lost its glow. He had seen what secrets cost. In the dim light of his office, he looked over a new report. Another scientist had vanished, this time from a quiet street in Geneva. No witnesses, no noise, just absence. He closed the file, exhaled slowly, and whispered, "We build to protect, and they destroy to survive. That is the balance now." In time, whispers reached Cairo of international outrage. Some said even allies were growing uneasy at the assassinations, worried that the games of spies were spilling too far beyond borders. But outrage changes little in the desert. The wind blew, the papers turned to dust, and the missions continued. What ended the hunt was not a treaty, nor victory, but exhaustion. Too many operatives burned, too many scientists fled, too many secrets bled into the sands. The dream remained, But the momentum faded. Egypt had learned again that in espionage, brilliance invites danger, and ambition always carries a shadow. That night, standing once more on his balcony overlooking the Nile, the man in the linen suit watched the lights of the city shimmer across the water. He thought of the letters, the explosions, the lives lost in the space between science and fear. The war beneath the sands had changed shape again. No longer about bombs or blueprints. It had become a war of perception, of who controlled the story, of who could convince the world that they were the threatened, not the threat. The man turned away from the city and whispered into the empty room. In espionage, truth is the last thing that survives. The horizon over the desert flickered with distant lightning. A storm was coming, not from nature, but from history itself. For soon, the world would stand at the edge of another confrontation that would redraw the map, rewrite alliances, and bury more secrets beneath the sand. The desert was quiet again, too quiet for peace. From the top of a dune, the man in the linen suit watched a convoy of trucks vanish toward the horizon, leaving trails of dust that faded into the golden air. He had seen this before. The stillness before history wakes up. It was 1967, and Egypt stood at the crossroads of destiny. For years, a war had been waged in whispers, through letters, lies, and disappearances. But now, the whispers were turning into movement. Radar installations blinked alive in Sinai. Soldiers drilled in the heat. Intelligence cables whispered of unusual troop movements near borders, of strange flights over the Red Sea, of intercepted chatter that made generals restless and ministers pale. The air itself seemed to hum with the sound of something inevitable. Inside a heavily guarded office in Cairo, the lights burned late. Maps covered the walls. Photographs lay scattered across the table. Blurred satellite images, coded notes, radio intercepts. The man in the linen suit leaned over them, tracing lines between points of light and shadow. "They're not waiting," he murmured. "They're preparing." He had been in this game too long to mistake signals for coincidence. Spies rarely speak the truth, but their patterns always do. Every intercepted message carried a rhythm of intent. The same rhythm he, D, heard before other storms. Outside, the streets of Cairo still buzzed with music and optimism. The people believed in unity, in strength, in destiny. But beneath that hope, the intelligence world felt something else. Fear wrapped in silence, the kind that comes before the first jet engine screams across the dawn. Across the border, preparations were underway, not for defense, but for preemption. Commanders met in secret rooms, briefed by intelligence officers who spoke in low, decisive tones. They carried maps marked with air bases, radar positions, and the routes of Egyptian patrols. Every detail had been gathered through years of observation, surveillance, and deception. The silent harvest of the desert's secrets. Some of those secrets had been stolen from conversations that never happened, rooms that never existed, people who never lived under their real names. That was the art of espionage, to know what others could not even admit they feared. And in those shadows, Mossad had done its work well. The man in the linen suit received the final briefing at dawn. The reports confirmed what he already knew. A coordinated strike was coming. The question wasn't if, but when. He sent a message up the chain, careful, precise, and urgent. It moved through corridors heavy with bureaucracy, landing finally on desks already buried under decisions. Some listened, others hesitated. And in that hesitation, fate took its shape. By the time Cairo realized the sky was falling, it already had. The morning of June 5th came like any other, sun rising over the Nile, radio stations playing patriotic songs, Cairo slowly waking. Then, within minutes, the songs were drowned out by thunder. Dozens of jets crossed the skies in tight formation, flying low, fast, silent. They weren't there to warn. They were there to erase. Airfields went up in flames. Radar posts blinked and died. The desert roared with engines and explosions. And just like that, the war that had been whispered in secret had burst into daylight. It was over before most soldiers even fired a shot. The man in the linen suit stood at his window and listened to the echoes, the distant hum of chaos. Somewhere inside him, he already knew. This was not a battle lost, but a truth revealed. The war beneath the sands had only ever been about control. Control of perception, of fear, of destiny. And now that control was gone. In the days that followed, Cairo moved like a city in shock. The newspapers tried to sound resolute. The radio called for unity, but behind closed doors, the silence of intelligence rooms told another story. Reports were shredded. Files vanished. Some men disappeared into foreign embassies. Others simply stopped coming to work. The man in the linen suit packed his briefcase slowly. He looked at the empty desk, the wall maps now meaningless. Years of quiet wars. All undone in 6 days, he walked out without saying goodbye. On the street, a newspaper boy shouted headlines that would echo through generations. But to him, the real loss wasn't territory. It was truth. Weeks later, deep in the Sinai, the wind moved over abandoned outposts, scattering papers, broken radios, and the burnt remains of uniforms. The war had passed, but its shadow lingered. Beneath one collapsed bunker, half buried in sand, a steel briefcase lay unopened, the kind used to carry files, or maybe something far more important. Its lock was broken, its contents never recovered. Some say it contained blueprints, others a list of names. But those who truly knew said it contained only one thing. A message written long before the war began. The desert keeps no secrets, only layers. Years later, when journalists and historians tried to piece together the events, they found fragments. Declassified memos, blurry photographs, testimonies whispered by men long gone. Each story contradicted the next, but all agreed on one truth. The war in Sinai was not born in 1967. It began years earlier, in hotel rooms, coded telegrams, and silent assassinations. The 6-day war was merely its eruption. The visible part of an invisible conflict that had been shaping the region for over a decade. And when the dust finally settled, the desert was silent again. But this time, it wasn't peace. It was waiting. As the man in the linen suit sat in a small cafe overlooking the Nile, he watched the sunset bleed into the water. Around him, Cairo moved on. Resilient, proud, and scarred. He sipped his coffee and thought of everything the sands had swallowed. Names, missions, ambitions. He knew others would come. Other agents. Other wars. The cycle would continue. Because in this region, beneath every ceasefire, another operation always waited to begin. He left the cafe quietly, disappearing into the crowd, just another shadow among millions. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the wind whispered through the dunes. A reminder that beneath the sands of Egypt, the war was never truly over. If you thought this mission was wild, wait until you hear what happened next. When the battlefield wasn't the desert, but the streets of Europe itself, subscribe to Spy Shadows so you don't miss the next declassified file. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? I love knowing how far these stories travel.